Welcome, Clara, to the Shared Experience Summit. I'm really excited to be meeting you face to face for the very first time. We connected on Clubhouse because our mutual friends, Amelia and Howard, were hosting some sort of session that seemed fascinating. And we wound up speaking and sharing a little bit. So um, I'd really love to understand more how your trajectory that brought you to this point.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here at the summit too. So thanks for having me. And I'm really glad we connected that day. In full honesty, it was a really cool space. How did I get to this point? Well, I like to begin with the story that at birth I decided to come out of my amazing mother's vulva area in the middle of a hippie festival in the middle of St. Kilda, Australia, as a child. And it was in the middle of the St. Kilda Festival, fire twirling, parades, all sorts of stuff. And I thought that would be a good time to start crowning. And then from there, I've had a really amazing childhood and adulthood. And we did a lot of traveling. We're Italian, so my parents took us back and forth between Italy and Melbourne and Australia. And throughout that time, I was making art all the time. That's actually some fun stories. I would create my parents' home into an immersive experience when they would be out for the day and they would come home. Much to their surprise, I'd rearrange the house. It's like, look, it's an immersive experience. Come on in, feel it. When I was literally 5, I did that. So that never left me. And then I did a medical science and a law degree as a double bachelor's in Australia, which ended up being very helpful. So, you mentioned
Uh,
earlier today this concept of not needing to compromise anymore. And I want to say I've been practicing that for a while, give or take some distortions and shadow work along the way
mm.
and me hiding from myself along the way. But that's always been something I've been doing, the law degree, the medical science alongside the acting. And I've now come to a place where I think I've figured out how to balance it all. And I'm excited that it keeps teaching me what I can do with it. So I think that answers the first part of the question.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I really love the story of when you chose to emerge. Um, that's totally amazing. I like to think I come from hippie stock. I mean, not totally, but my cousin Albert used to tell me the stories when I was very young of him hitchhiking to Woodstock. No, he rode his motorcycle to Woodstock, and there was some accident, and he wound up like flipping over another car and landing on his feet, and he wound up hitchhiking the rest of the way. And he's actually on the movie posters, like naked in the creek. And he was one of my big inspirations. He would show up in his like 1965 orange Porsche, and he's always like the guy I wanted to be when I grew up. you
Very
know
cool.
so
Very
so I
cool.
totally appreciate that. I do have some other questions and pathways around what you shared, but first I'd like to just more understand what you're manifesting now in terms of your career and profession and lifestyle.
Yeah. What I'm manifesting now are a lot of self devised theatrical pieces and musicals that I've written with some amazing colleagues. So, where right now we're optioning that piece to producers, to some Broadway folk, which is really exciting. Alongside that, the space in which you and I met was alongside Howard, who is the pioneer of the soul lunar work and therapy. And he and I are getting together with some other folk to apply that teaching not only in the acting and art space but also in the corporate space in a more rigorous isn't quite the right word, but a more wholesome acceptance of it in that world. So we've been doing that. What else have I been manifesting? I've been really lucky throughout COVID. I was able to do a lot of voiceover work. I did a lot of film work. I booked a bunch of stuff with my agent, which was just so wonderful that they could, have some income and I could make some art. It was great. So I'm manifesting more of that. I would love to do more of that. We've had some really great NDA signed castings. So hopefully
Mm,
some of them come to fruition. They come to fruition. So I'm doing
wow.
that as well.
Well,
Yeah.
cool. One thing I saw, I'm really interested in this intersection between the business setting and the artistic creative setting. I mean, that's actually the core of my work. And I'm at the center of that is this whole concept of work-life balance, as if when you're at work, you're at one person, and when you're living, you're a different person. And that's something that's always, from a very young age, been very confusing to me and has caused me a lot of conflict and chaos in the past before I reconciled those two sides. So just tell me a little bit more about what you've been doing, first of all, in a professional setting, if you've been working with executives, the voiceover stuff, sort of what your experience there is, and how you see bringing in some of the creativity and freedom into those settings.
Yeah, before I deep dive there, I want to just flag, actually 2 days ago, I did a dance piece that we're airing very soon with a collective called the 98ers. And this whole dance, we filmed it in a skating ring, which is really cool. But this whole dance piece is about this concept of balance versus perfectionism and
Mm.
that distortion that you described, right? That sort of inner turmoil of these two words and what do they even mean and why do we obsess about them and demand that people meet. So yeah, I'll send you that link when we have it.
Oh, I
But
love that.
yeah,
Great.
we're really exploring that and using art as a way to explore these bigger concepts that are, you know, balance and perfectionism definitely comes up in the artistic world, but definitely are very present, I think, in the corporate world. So to answer your question, the other thing I do is I teach public speaking and I'm a speech coach for a lot of people. And that's, I actually find a really incredibly fulfilling job because generally what will happen is people will come to me, huge generalization. They'll come to me because they talk too fast or they talk too softly or their CEO asked them to do more speeches and they're not ready to do speeches, or they believe they have some accent they need to modify. They need to sound more generic American, which is what I'm doing right now. This is not my natural voice. Anyway, all this stuff that's going on. And generally what it is they just really need to take a nice deep breath and probably practice some form of yoga or some sort of relaxation kind of thing. And through that, they really start to manifest the speaking quality that they really love. And there's a whole body of study about authenticity and how authenticity in speech is kind of not really even a thing. Like we're conditioned by our culturalisms, our language. It's a whole big conversation. I would say authenticity of the spirit is there, but how we then put that into our muscle memory in our body is different. I like to joke with my clients on a serious level that speech is an active sport. It's a training of the muscle memory. It's a training of the brain to the mouth to the body connection. And that system will generally always work for you. So how does that all interplay with the professional setting, with these concepts of balance, of work-life balance, etc.? Well, often these clients that I'm working with are very senior executives in their company or entrepreneurs or athletes. I've worked with some really incredible senior athletes, some coaches, umpires of certain sporting events. What else? Oh, a lot of pharmacy students. I just did an event last week with a bunch of medical professionals and legal professionals. Just as a pause for the listeners, the reason why this is really, I think, interesting is that a lot of the lawyers I often work with are very proficient in their legal setting to talk, but often they'll have panic attacks if they have to make a speech for a brother's wedding kind of situation. So this real disjoint sort of understanding of self, which I think is the disjoint that you're talking about with the work-life balance, this inner turmoil. And when we start to breathe and apply some of these techniques that I use, there's more of a balance and a synergy. I mentioned the solar lunar work, this concept that all of us have an inner solar lunar balance. Ancient wisdom, this is not particularly a new concept. Then in yin and the yang is a good analogy within the Tao, sorry. When these sides, and even sides, I cringe a little bit because start to merge together, you start to enjoy it more together. But I think the West and probably a few other cultures have done a really good job of breaking them apart, which now I'm going to go a little bit off topic. I think was a fun experiment, right? We plonk on Earth a few thousand years ago. We're like, let's see if we can destroy. What happens if we do break down these systems? Can we still function? Can we still build buildings? Can we design technology? Let's see what happens. We can. Fantastic. Now let's go back to merge together.
I love
So we
that.
enjoy the technology and what we've built a little more. Because yeah, your metaphor of this work-life balance as if they're not one and the same, I see as the dissociation when individual clients come to me for their speech training, when they're not really accepting the fullness of themselves. And sure, they can dial up elements of themselves for certain situations, but when they're disjointed and not accepting the fullness of themselves, a similar turmoil will happen, even if it's as simple as they just have a panic attack when they do a speech, right? The turmoil doesn't have to be their world is crashing down. Yeah.
God, I so love that. I actually had a conversation recently with one of my mentors, Sophie Savage, who uh, processed me essentially on something early on in the COVID experience. My cousin died and of COVID. She was in a home. She was um, already suffering from some dementia, and she wasn't expected to be on the earth for a long time, but it affected me just incredibly deeply in a way I didn't expect. Um, and when I was working with Sophie, it really wound up getting down into Holocaust grief in a lot of ways. And some of the drama came out in terms of the way we treat our elders and relating those to concentration camps, the concentration camps at the border. And I just got into the space of, you know, wow, we've built this concentration camp. So you only have two choices. You can be a guard or a prisoner. And it's just like the space I got myself into mentally. And I love the way you brought in, this isn't a tragedy. This is a grand experiment. We still have the choice to, okay, that was fun. I'm tired of playing prisoner. I'm tired of playing guard. Let's go back to the hippie festival.
Right. Yeah. And I think I actually had a thought today. I didn't think I was going to share it with you, but it's coming up. The choice to disjoint humans from source, God, Allah, whatever you want to call it, the balance of solar lunar, the choice to encourage people to be removed from that, I think has on some level, in inverted commas, great benefits to those in power wanting forced labor and movement and policy and all that kind of stuff. And the reason I share that is, for example, I'm going to get into some deep waters. Let's see if we can go there.
Good.
I got jabbed today with the vaccine. I'm very grateful to that and hugely grateful for the essential workers. And as I was leaving the hospital, because I have this background in medical science, I work with a lot of doctors on a regular basis, pharmaceutical people, etc. It's part of my world. I like it. There's a lot in medicine that I think is great. But the other side of that too is, and I think I used to identify as this, the altruism of wanting to be a lawyer or the altruism of wanting to be a medical professional, right? You're helping people. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. But then also, you have to be a medical or you don't have to be, one could be a legal or medical professional and still have the spark of joy of alignment inside their job. It's very easy in these spaces to get thrown so much crap and intensity that it starts to wear on your psyche and your emotionality, and it starts to disjoint you more. And then we're promoting, right? Like attracts like, you manifest what you're habiting, your habits are, et cetera, et cetera. You're doing more of that stuff. And it came to mind today because the person who helped guide me into the line was the most amazing, positive person I've ever seen. We're in the hospital. There's a lot of sadness that goes on in hospitals. Everyone was pleasant and okay. We're getting a jab for a shot. It's not like it was anything too intense. But this particular individual was making a point as a medical professional to just be a spark of life. And I was like, wow, I wonder if I'd gone in with that mentality as a junior lawyer in training in a medical environment, ended up doing medical law for a couple of years as a trainee. If I'd gone in with that mentality rather than the altruism of it's the good thing to do, I'm a good person for doing it, I might have absorbed less of this turmoil. I might have actually gone in going, oh, that's turmoil that I don't want, but I can still be there to help administer the situation, or I can still be there to help in this very intense schizophrenic pro bono case we're doing for women's rights without me taking on that intensity in my own aura. Because I think another side of this conversation, I'm sorry for the intense sirens of New York City, irony as we talk about turmoil, is that the other side of that conversation that I've often noticed is people who are in a space of wanting to be extreme healers, which is great, also then rejecting any sense of turmoil. I'm like, no, I don't think we need to shun people that are figuring out their situation or vibration or alignment. Not everyone does that, obviously, but that's always been something that's made me curious. I'm like, if you're so aligned, why are you so scared of someone being unaligned? These are broad brushstrokes. I mean, huge
Yeah.
generalizations. And so going back to the work-life balance, which places that are altruistic really promote, they're not trying to, I think, crush people down or break them apart or put them in turmoil. But a lot of those places, I think, and I used to be in that space, come to it from a place of it's the right thing to do. And just that mentality then
Mm.
pulls them away and creates, I think, sometimes more turmoil. I hope I'm making sense. In my head, it's very
So much, so much. And there's just the challenge, and I've been taking notes because I want to pull on so many of these threads. I have to decide which one to start with. But one is just that idea of doing what's right or doing good. Um, that brings into it a judgment in the first place, good or bad. And what my starting point for this entire project, this entire enterprise of Scoby Social, was witnessing some of my friends, mentors, partners, guides in poverty dramas because of their commitment to serve. Right. And and I said, and I was meanwhile I was looking online and seeing Russell Brunson and Grant Cardone and Frank Kern and Amy Portersfield and all these funnels, list building, make tons of money and all these ways to make tons of money. And I saw this crazy split, and almost all of them were the source for a lot of that was Tony Robbins, which has NLP as a background. That all started with Guthy-Ranker. So I basically followed these two paths and saw them as parallel paths. Okay, so bear with me for a moment now. um, uh, where in that split you're talking about, the solar lunar, money is very solar. In not necessarily solar, but when it's clumped together as particle, as matter, it's solar. When it's the field effect of economies, it's lunar. So that same idea, and I used to go to hippie gatherings. I went to the Rainbow Gathering in 1986, and I actually went to, okay, now I'm going to tell the story quickly because it is pertinent, but I was putting out an album, the Yale New Haven compilation, and I needed to pay for the pressing. So I put $100 in my boot. I hitchhiked to the Rainbow Gathering, and I was like, "How can I buy a sheet of acid for for $1 a tab, and then bring it back to New Haven?" Well, I get there, and everyone's saying, "Oh, no green energy, man, no green energy." And I'm like, "Oh, I can't spend money. It's this whole barter economy. How am I going to buy acid?" Um, and then someone came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder right around the central fire and said, "Hey, I know where you can get some Rainbow Family acid." I was like, "Cool." So I go to this little tent. He goes in, comes out. We agree on um, $100 for a tab. I first said, $75, and they came back and said 100, and I was like, perfect. And I got the most beautiful sheet of acid that, like, two color medieval sun. I brought it back to New Haven, and like all the local punks were like high for the entire summer. Um, but what was really interesting to me is that, to me, was a real lesson in economics, because yes, everything was free, but ultimately someone has to pay for the party, right? So even if someone's bringing there, so anyway, back to all of this, I saw those money dramas, poverty dramas, and I said, how can I manifest an ecosystem where people are honored, respected, and valued? And I really saw a lot of that came from people valuing themselves. And and how they valued themselves, and that old airplane thing of putting your own oxygen mask on before attending to the person next to you. So that really in the background is the theme of this experience. Is right now you're providing so much value to me, and I know to all the other people watching, that I'm really starting to see, instead of this whole idea of guides and follow or leaders and followers or clients and mentors and all that, I really am just seeing this manifestation of partnerships and partnering just almost everywhere. And in each of those partnerships, there can be a very energetic, supporting flow of value. So anyway, that was a long way around of saying I totally get what you're talking about, and I appreciate you bringing it up in that way of this sort of flowing balance,
Yeah,
and not the rigidity.
yeah, a symbiotic, I think, comes to
Right.
mind when you say that. And I'm reminded of a quote that I think I heard Abraham Hicks through Esther Hicks say on a Gaia documentary. I can't quite remember the source, but it was something like to the effect of, the quote was, "When I attract my clients, the meeting of minds will level us both. This partnering of it will bring value to all entities that are present." And I think that just came to mind when you were sharing your vision and
Yeah.
how you're manifesting this. I think it's on point and appropriate because we're coexisting. It's not like there's yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Well, cool. So one of the threads that I wrote down that I want to really get back into some more is this idea of hiding and how you found that you were hiding, because some people don't necessarily know that they have this, that they're wearing a cloak of invisibility, and they're doing it subconsciously. And it's something I'm really working with quite a few people on, letting go of that and stepping out as the rock star CEO or whatever you want to be, and not hide. So how did that come up for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the beginning in this human body. So when I was born, I describe it was a hippie festival. I don't know if my parents would agree that they are still hippies, but that's where it started. But when I was born, I remember. I think this is probably common for many, not all, but many children who have a good experience. I was just me. I just had a great time, and I remember playing with my nonna, and everything was just very symbiotic, and everything was just curious and fun and present. And then I started, I think it was primary school, and I got very shy, and I probably was surrounded by some fighting that probably didn't make it very helpful. And that dependency habit that some children take on when there's so much upset and pain going on, that you take it on as it's your fault and your problem. So you overreach, you overcompensate, and then you take that into your teens, and hormones come in and da da da. So that was all happening. And I started to literally hide as a kid because this kind of very effervescent person that I was internally and had been in front of strangers forever started to feel that she couldn't come out. And
Mm.
then moments would come out when she would come out talking about solar lunar, her a very strong solar side would come out in me. For example, when I had family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, that kind of thing, say something really cruel to another family member, little Miss Soapbox Joan of Arc over here would be like, "Don't say that. That's not nice." And overcompensate for the hiding that had been happening. And that had its own ramifications where I was like, oh, maybe I'm now in trouble for speaking, when it was like, no, that was great. Do more of that. But it can come from a lunar complex. It doesn't have to be so. So that was back and forth then. And then in a practical sense, the hiding happened because I am an artist and I am a businesswoman. And I grew up in an environment where you have to choose. There are great things about my culture, but let's just focus on some distortions for now. Some of the distortions are, especially in the European cultural world for artistry, you have to choose, or used to have to choose, one industry. You couldn't direct and act. You couldn't be a lawyer and a medical person. You had to choose one or the other. And so that was a bit in my psyche. On top of that, I had a fabulous family. All of them are amazing, but also they had their own hangups about things, right? So there was a bullying of like, why would you do anything other but the law? Or why are you doing medicine? We're not science people. We're humanitarian people. What is that about? ironically, a lot of family members are artists, like literally artists. So it was a weird, so there was that hiding too going on, this sort of mask work of have to be one thing and the other. And then I practically took that into the workplace. I remember working in a law firm as a trainee lawyer. Like I said, I was doing medical law at the time in Australia, and I loved it there. But I wouldn't tell my colleagues when I would have a big main stage production as a female lead, in fear of them retaliating against me because, no, you're a lawyer. Which one do you want to do? And part of that was in my imagination because of my cultural obsessing and not healing that. And then others, it was literal. I had a senior boss say to me once, which do you want to be? A serious lawyer or a hobbying actor? And I remember her saying that to me, and just sort of this fear. Ironically, this particular firm I worked at, we had a professional famous opera singer who was also a senior partner. So he'd made it up, and then there's a gender war there that goes on too. So it's a whole myriad of distortions coming to play. But I literally would hide it. Like I literally had different emails that I would send out to different community members, which is okay if I'm sending it from a place of integrity and authenticity. Not so okay if I'm doing it to literally not be caught by certain people in the industry. And even the art industry was pretty cruel at the time about my law background. A few people really supported it, and it was useful to help draft contracts for, you know, helping the artist space, or also just respecting me that I did like to analyze and understand stuff, which as an actor is kind of great, actually. You have to understand that human behavior. But I remember a lot of colleagues being like, oh, I guess you're not a serious artist then, or you're at law school, so you can't really be wanting to do this. So that's some examples of how.
I love this. I just feel so simpatico because I went through something so similar in um, being really fucking smart and getting into Yale, early decision, and all of that, but also really intensely identifying with the rebel hero. So, you know, to the point, not wanting to disappoint my parents, but wanting to do this. And so to the point where I bought a motorcycle without them knowing. Um, they would send me money to take the train back from New Haven to DC. I'd ride my motorcycle and park it, you know, in a friend's driveway, get a lift home, and like, you know, it's exhausting living in those two worlds. Like, you know, and finally, fortunately, one way or another, they come together for a lot of people. For me, that was you actually have to hit bottom, you know, and for me, it was time in jail, time in a mental hospital. Like I literally like had to work it out that yes, it was okay for me to be brilliant and powerful and focused and creative and whatever I wanted to do and whatever I wanted to be, I could do that. But it, you know, the bottom is a long way down. And sometimes, you know, you have to a lot of bumps along the way. So I really appreciate your sharing that.
Yeah, the bumps are funny because, yeah, I hit rock bottom. We can talk about that in a minute. But part of me goes, I would love a world where my fellow humans, the ones that haven't had this awakening or however you want to frame it, don't have to necessarily hit rock bottom in order to have
Exactly.
that experience. Because, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong to say that. But you know, some spiritualities say no, it's important that it comes from the lotus and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, also maybe not. I
Right.
not, maybe not. I part of, you know, and I do believe in timing and that divinity of timing and things happening when they're ready. But I also, I really believe in communication. I talk a lot, doesn't have to be talking. Communication can be meditating together, telepathically sending love. It can be a whole heap of different stuff. But really, this concept of what we're doing now, what you're creating with the summit, this concept of communing, I think helps maybe avoid this need, this current story that many of us have that have really hit rock bottom. Because I'll give you an example of the hiding. I wrote a movie about this that's on Amazon, so I feel somewhat protected to share. I'm not sort of sharing anonymity too much. But when I immigrated to America, I was invited to come and work with an amazing physical theater company in their conservatory. Their inaugural conservatory was a huge deal. It's a big deal. It's very exciting. They're called City, SITI. And so I came to do that 7-ish years ago now. I had no plans to come to America unless it was for work. So it was this kind of cool synergy thing. And I remember, my parents are saints, but I remember one parent being furious that I was coming to the land of America. And whilst there are great things about America, and, you know, I definitely am in a white body and I'm very aware of what's going on in the world right now. And I think that's actually important for a lot of these healing spaces to see how we can really show up in this space. My parents' concern for me coming here was because of these issues. They're like, this is not a country that loves its people. No, 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 no. Of course it does on some level, but the pain that we're seeing. So it was ironic because their motivation for being upset at me was justified. I mean, they and I are in complete agreement with that. But they were dealing with their own solar lunar balances, and so it came out as a way of bad human child daughter for not following in what I've instilled in you to do. And so then I would hide even more, because then, as a response to that, I came here and I thrived artistically, but I hid from a lot of my family. And I'm still healing some of that hiding while still coming out. And I've sort of been very strong with them in many spaces. But the hiding manifested in the sense that I was alone. I didn't know anyone in this country. I love America and I'm really enjoying New York City, but I was green. I'm happy. I smile a lot. New Yorkers are like, who is this LA vibe human? Like, no, you're going to be eaten alive by the wolves. I was eaten alive by the wolves. I had some very intense situations that were very scary and sad, and hashtag Me Too issues all over the place, which I never had in Australia. And I'd worked with some people who were a little distorted and douchey, but I'd always had a sixth sense of like, no. Whereas here, I'd forgotten how to say no when I showed up.
Mhm.
So my need to hide also meant that I lost my healthy boundaries in very real ways. And then I got together with a person who he and I were navigating our own inner distortion stuff and whatever that means. But on some level, I also was desperately in need of protection in a very sort of Western, patriarchal might not be quite the right word, but in that kind of sense, right? Like a womanly woman needing a man. And that was even more hiding, to the point where we were in the middle of breaking up or kind of trying to heal what we were trying to heal. And our apartment went up in flames. I woke up in the middle of the night at 5 a.m, surrounded by fire, and then proceeded to be essentially homeless for 3 months. So yeah, it was a lot of rock bottoms, and like friends around me, and I'm so grateful to my friends. That's why I say this extreme of the healed. I think as long as your oxygen mask goes on first,
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong to be around someone who doesn't have an oxygen mask on. How can they possibly hurt me if my armor of love, if my as my friend Sheila Smiley says, my mentor, if my fire brigade suit is on, how can they possibly hurt me if
Mm.
if I'm really there? Because those friends that were there for me, I mean, I was chaos. I can't thank them enough. My leg had been cut open. There was violence. It was horrible. And so that rock bottom then made me go, huh, oh no, I don't want this at all. No, 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 no,
Mm.
no, I like life. And then the process of just sort of the soul family showing up magically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's so funny. So when you said something about a world, right? The world doesn't have to be this way or doesn't have to be. And you'd also talked about source, God, Allah, whatever. There are a couple resonances that I'd like to amplify. One is back to what we're creating with Scoby Social, Scoby Society, Scoby Academy, and Scoby Studios, this sort of ecosystem that we're bringing forward. Um, the way I viewed that was as a safe space to co-create, because I've realized I'm probably not going to quote change the world. I'm probably not in my lifetime, even though, I think it was James Joyce who said basically in Ulysses, every um, Jewish male thinks their son's going to be the Messiah, you know. Um, uh, but just having, I think, the power of having a safe space where, and by co-creation, one thing I hear all the time, and there's also part of the person I mentioned earlier, Sophie. Um, there's two axes that she's worked on with a community called More to Life, Brad Brown. There's a certain technique, but there are these leadership axes of cold and hot.
Yeah.
And people use these, and then different kind of below the line or dramatic ways to manifest that, or above the line or supportive ways to manifest that. But I hear people using that axis, or using DISC, or using whatever. Someone said this to me before. I don't even remember what DISC stands for, but it's those four things like Myers-Briggs. And people wind up putting themselves in one of these things. And so I'm an ENTJ and you're an INTP. And so of course we relate this way. But what I learned from Howard in he was my business coach for 12 years. I mean, you can imagine how amazing that would be to have
Yeah.
Howard as your business coach for a dozen freaking years. Right, right. Um, what I learned was I actually have style versatility when
Mm.
all of these archetypes serve me as guides.
Yeah.
So when you talked about source, the two words I didn't hear, which are the two ways that I really go back to source, one is life and one is nature.
Yeah.
And so God and all these others. So life and nature itself
Yeah.
as source, being omnipresent, being available. You can use the quantum physics guide or the solar guide or the lunar guide or the Allah guide or the Tankashla guide or the Unshimaka guide. But the two of those guides that are so important that I really see you as achieving a great deal of balance with are the Senex and the Puer, or the Icarus and Daedalus,
Mm.
where the artistic is the Senex, the engineer, the medicine, the lawyer, has the fear of the Icarus flying too close to the sun. They're the engineer getting to the other side. The artist wants the experience of what's going to happen. And just knowing, when I finally got to that point of, I can be in a meeting with vulture capitalists, and if I'm going to be the Icarus, if I'm presenting the lunar side,
Mm.
then they're likely to attack because the solar eats the lunar alchemically. And if I present as solar, then they'll either relax or be so committed to that challenge that ultimately there will be a choice of not remaining, because it just becomes a power struggle. It just becomes control. And I found that not just with investors, but I found that with clients. I found that with customers. I found that with partners, that there just is this point, as you were saying, that person really might not choose to put on an oxygen mask. And that's totally freaking okay. I can still sit in my seat. They
Right.
can sit in their seat. That's a perfectly legitimate boundary. So I love the way you described that within you, and that ultimately getting to the point where, just one more word that I love is liminality. I see
Ooh.
you having that ability to walk in both of those worlds. And in the past, you believed you had to choose.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I wanted to, now I'm getting to a question because I want to stop
No, thank you for these
pontificating enough.
gifts. These are great gifts. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, the performative and the authentic, it's a distinction that you drew, which was really interesting in terms of that practice, and speech making and becoming a public speaker. Essentially, what you were sharing was, in order to get authentic is, I suddenly saw it as a circle, right?
Oh, that's
You
great.
can be authentic and hidden, or you can develop the performance skills to be authentic and revealed.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's
Okay.
exactly what I do. Yeah. And it's so funny because I've in the last couple of years I've been using Solo Lunar as great parameters to do some of this work with people. But even in the early days, I used to again joke but seriously say to clients how we cognitive behavioral therapy gives us the tenet that how we feel affects how we think affects how we behave, act, whatever you want to use as a word. So if we take that tenet, that is a circle. And as a speech coach, we can come at it at any of those points. I can do meditations with you, and we can visualize you speaking. We can just get you doing drills, and we can get you doing the thing you want. We could think about thoughts. We can do all of it. And my job became, which is I personally thoroughly loved, was to almost like a detective, like you were doing with me, figure out where that person's strength was in that moment, or like you said, the vulture capitalist. Where are you? Not that my client's a vulture capitalist, but where are you meeting that person? And then through healthy ego, nourishing that side of them to do more of it as they start to develop the other sides of it. So yeah, but just the way you phrased it, the performative
Well,
to
so
authentic.
the two, I'm suddenly getting some feedback. I'm not sure. Are you
Oh,
hearing it?
no, I don't hear the.
Okay, so maybe it's not getting recorded. Oh, and it left. There was just an echo for a moment. I have no idea why. Um, that goes back to another one of those myths of Narcissus and echo.
Yeah.
One thing Howard said to me is all change happens in dialogue. And so one thing that's such a gift here for me is that I get to practice my craft with such a willing partner. Because one thing that I learned from Howard is that in the gift of complementarity and the words, what I bring my clients to is ultimately two words. And that's what I do. I actually had a session this morning with one of my clients that people are going to see at this summit. We're going to share more of what came out of it. But the two words were system to ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And system was the solar and ecosystem was the lunar.
Yeah.
And for you, those two words um, are authentic performance.
Yeah.
Like just that thing. And if anybody could, and that's for me, just sort of where I came to it. So if I was going to recommend you, right? If I was going to say to somebody, and just all the people watching, I'm recommending Clara to everybody because of what she's already brought to me in this, however long we spent together. Um, uh, that like I can't think of a domain in which authentic performance being real but presenting as real
Yeah.
is not almost the central organizing principle or the most important skill.
Right.
So I see this gift you have of bringing out authentic performance is like, okay, I want that. I want to keep working with you. So yeah, give me more. So that's so cool. All right. Well, so we got to the heart of the matter. Now, what if you had, so there are three parts of what I view as shared experiences. There's the preparation for it,
Yeah.
the during it, which we're doing now,
Yeah.
and then there's the delivery.
Yeah.
So if you were working with me as your client, um, there was some preparation that we did. We met on Clubhouse, and I looked up your website. There's stuff there, so I got an idea about you. That's sort of all the leading up to. Now we've had this conversation. Um, if I said I really wanted to be an authentic performer,
Mm-hmm.
what's the delivery? How would you work with me? What do you have?
Yeah. This is a great.
What's your program? What's your offering?
as a partner client is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. So if I was your client, or if my company, I mean, right now my company's 4 people, but like you're saying, bringing things into the business setting,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be me. So talk more about these things you're doing. I guess I want the people who are watching this I want them to get the here's how to order moment.
Got it. Understood.
Right.
Well, I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, right now you're coming across as authentic performance to me, so I'm not
Good.
what we can do, but there's exercise and fun. But yeah, I would work with a client. Howard often says the lunar, and oh gosh, I'm gonna misquote him. Let the lunar guide you and then act on the solar.
Yeah.
And when I
beautiful.
work with a client, it matters to me a lot because we're in a Western space and it is so, in many ways, solar driven and lunar distortion driven and sometimes solar distortion driven, that we get really clear basic principles. So what I would do was I would spend 40 minutes just teaching, just kind of having shared principles, basic knowledge about the anatomy, the physiology, the psychology, the philosophy, the history, the tenets of basic speech and how your body works, how the physical anatomy functions, what you can do to press buttons to make it work really effectively, and the science behind that. So we would do that. I generally also do 10-ish minutes prior to that of diagnostics with a client. I test what of their instrument is effectively working at a easy level and what I then think we need to then modulate or tinker. And I don't tell them what I'm testing because that gets them all in their head and stops the balance of what I'm trying to see is where's their intuition meeting their anatomy? Where's the lunar allowing the solar to go? So then after we have that shared language and shared principles, because it helps, I'm just going to pause. I think labels are beautiful. Humans, especially white humans, have done a horrible job of using labels. We used to be bigots, we used to other, we used to distort. I mean, not only white people, but I think we've done a really special job. I want to blame especially the Catholic Church, which I apparently hailed from long, long time ago. But labels are beautiful if they're used without this binary, without this judgment, without this bigotism, right? Because it just helps shorthand concepts. And these concepts, shorthanded can change. I love the complementarity that Howard uses instead of saying balance. I think that's a very important change of language because language is powerful. But I also don't think that we need to, as healers or people holding space or creatives, fear labels. So with the concept of labels, going back to my work,
Beautiful.
I give us labels. I give us labels that help us give parameters to what we're talking about because we like to pretend that humans are robots, but we're not. And when I'm working with someone, if I don't give them shared parameters that are less intense value judgments, they're going to bring their own stuff to it, which isn't necessarily right or wrong, but it will definitely have value judgment in it. And that's in fact one of the biggest words we use. We use the word observe the self rather than judge the self. I'm observing that I'm wearing this black lace top. Was it appropriate to wear that in the session or not? I can observe that and have a dialogue about it without being like, bad Clara for wearing black lace with David. No, 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 etc. I think so. We have these parameters, and then we start to do solar-based exercises, drills to practice this muscle memory, whilst doing lunar, and whilst I use lunar-based language to address and look into some of these elements. So that's what we would do. And along the way, I share what I consider treats or trinkets of information. For example, one thing that I like to say very early on is most of the time I'm working with people who are not as experienced as you as communicating and being recorded. And often, even if they are, they have huge resistance to doing it. And I say, do you like the sound of your voice? No. I want you to record yourself and listen back for 7 days in a row. No, no. I said, do you know why you're having that reaction? Because I'm just not good, or I sound too high, or I sound too low, whatever the issue is. I said, no, the reason you're having that reaction is a medical one. And when I'm working with med students, I love to ask them if they can tell me. One person did. I have one client who was like, yes, you got it. The reason for it, may I share with your listeners?
Yeah, please. I'm so excited.
So medical students will have this very clear, but anyone who's been to the doctor and had the mastoid bone tested with that sound, they go ding, and the doctor holds it by your ear, and then it moves it from the bone to the ear to see if you can still hear the sound. And they're testing to they're testing for air conduction and auditory sense. So why is that relevant with speech? Well, air conducts sound better, I know that's a judgment word, but better than bone. So air allows sound to travel in it much more effectively than the bone. And what do you and I have in our head? Massive amounts of bones, right? Skull, teeth, you can't take them out, otherwise we wouldn't be able to articulate. So when I share that with people, I go, the truth is, I as Clara, till the day I move into the next universe, will always sound different in my head than how David hears me. That won't ever change. It just won't. The microphone will always hear me correctly. I make sure it's got binaries and total distortion. You will always hear me correctly. The audience will always hear me correctly. And I will always hear myself incorrectly. That won't ever change. So once we accept that principle, I mean, there's not much to debate. It's just how it rolls.
Science.
Right, science. I know it's a once you listen to yourself and record yourself and listen back, the more you do that, first of all, the hurdle is just to get over the ego distortion of the discomfort. And that takes about a week, which is why I say, please, one sentence a day, same time every day. I like apples. Today I had pork. So it doesn't have to be complicated, and just listen back. Once you get over that discomfort, quantum reality, subconscious, it starts to work wonders. And you start to adjust your voice in the way that you would like it to come out. So that's one of my little trinkets.
I love that so much. And it's so interesting. I worked myself through that same pathway you're describing, because my last job, I took time off from entrepreneuring to serve as entrepreneur in residence for a year for this global nonprofit. And in this nonprofit, there were all of these amazing educators. They were just incredible. And the way they interacted with people and their whole presence and everything. And they liked working with me. And we would have these sessions with them. And then I would send all these long notes as a follow-up, all these long messages. And it was saying, why don't you record videos? You're so present, you're so genuine, you're so compassionate, you're so empathetic when we're in these meetings. And I said, you really don't want to see me on video. I'm not the same. I'm really bad at it. All those things, lashing myself, judging myself. Exactly. And I said, okay, I'll record a video, and I did. I recorded video to explain something and share something. And the feedback I got back was, you're right, that was terrible. Don't do that. I'm serious. Your authenticity, the way you are and the way you're present when you're interacting with people is one thing, but this just came across as this other thing. And I was like, okay. So there is something that was true in terms of what I thought when I interact with somebody in a conversation or dialogue is not the same as when I'm talking to a camera. So that was something, okay, great. That was new information. So what I decided to do was, for 8 days, and I don't know, I said, I'm just going to do it as long as it's comfortable for myself. I didn't pick 8 days, but I said, I'm going to live stream 8 days ride-alongs where I'm just going to go on Facebook Live on the Scobie page, and I'm just going to talk about what I'm doing. And it was so hard, and I watched them. And not only that, like, somebody actually shared it as something that was really bad. And one of the things they said was, they took a screen cap and said, what's in his nose? Like, it was like that bad. Like, I know, bad, again, judgment. But what was really cool about it was, afterwards and looking at those, and then I signed up for this thing with Frank Kern, and he as I got, it was 4 courses for $4 or something. One of them was Black Box Video.
Mm.
And I watched it and he said, first of all, just be cool. Don't be a douche, right? Talk to the camera like you're talking to your best friend and just sharing these things. And after the 8 days, the videos that I'm doing now, literally, okay, I sent one to somebody
Mm.
and they said, "Oh my God, you're like Bill Clinton." And
Awesome.
I couldn't believe it. I was like,
Yeah.
they sense that I felt their pain. Like I led with my heart in talking to a camera, and I was like, wow, I did that.
100%. That's amazing. That's really cool. And you mentioned something that I have always been very curious about. One of my mentors, and after we discussed the crashing and burning and resurrecting of self, Sheila gave me this wonderful mantra of everything is working out for me. And when I was first given this gift, I didn't really know what to do with it. I was like, yeah, yeah, I'll keep saying it. And then one day I was like, oh, everything is working out for me, even when my feathers are ruffled, even
Right.
when I'm feeling uncomfortable, even when I'm distorting my solar or my lunar. In that
Right.
it's lesson. And you just brought it up, right? Like, although you got really judgment based things hurled at you, there was something really cool about it.
Right.
Took you to the next level of what you wanted to do. And I think that's a really important part of a lot of this work too, that not to go looking for drama or not to take off the oxygen mask, but if something goes a little roughly, it's okay.
So this is what I came up with, which is sort of a corollary to everything
Yeah.
else that's working out for you. It's every wound contains a gift,
Yeah.
and you have to open up the wound to accept the gift. So when I had that wound of don't do that anymore, you're really bad at that, right?
Yeah.
And yes, it was a judgment, so I could have taken that judgment on myself, or I could have discerned, okay, what is the wisdom in this?
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and open up the wound. Like, I'm not just going to avoid it and say, okay, where in that, you know, am I actually doing something? How am I being, because remember, this is authentic performance.
Yeah.
So I was being inauthentic.
Right.
Somehow,
Yeah.
in talking to the camera, I
Yeah.
was trying to convince someone out there of something or prove something, or just I wasn't I wasn't actually connecting with this person because I wasn't sharing my authentic self. So your gift of authentic performance is incredibly challenging.
Yeah. Well, actually, if I can, I want to add
Yeah.
two things to that. This concept of authentic performance and the authenticity being in lunar and performance being in solar, which is true when they're aligned or non-distorted, they're definitely there. But also within that, you have authentic elements that are solar, and you have authentic elements that are lunar. You have authentic the performance elements that are lunar, performance elements that are solar. And a really clear example in your story that comes up for me in that is, and I love that you said this, when we're not leading from our heart, which is what you said, that's when the authenticity or the performance element can break down.
Mm,
But I think a lot of the time, at least in my experience with my private clients and group clients, there's resistance to lead from the heart because there's so much bullying that you
mm.
can't even acknowledge that you have a heart half the time. And so even if you're talking about something you know really well, right? It's your field of expertise. There should be no issue being authentically performative, but there's so much subconscious mental blockage or blocking of the heart that happens. And so in that space of it is challenging, but I think a core principle is if we start to practice that within the authenticity, it's not just woo woo femininity, like lead from your heart, everyone. Like, no, it's very, it's very supple and clear and gifting. I mean, if this concept of masculine, feminine, which is a bit too binary for me, but this concept of men give and women receive, it's a giving. You're sharing your message with your audience, generally for a job interview or for a jury. Like, you're doing it for something you want to have happen. So there can be a healthy ego in that alongside the gift of that, but also knowing, and this is why I say generally when I work with clients, generally there are a couple exceptions. I start with the parameters so we're on the same page of the anatomy. Is that authenticity even has solar anatomical science things to share? And if often my client has that data in their head, it's easier for them to go, oh, now I can lead from my heart because I'm not fighting my authenticity on an anatomical level, if that makes sense. It's almost like the distorted solar and the distorted lunar shows up when we're not leading from the heart. And I guess one example of that is, normally I make this a question with clients, but I'll just share my thoughts.
Yeah.
What does even authenticity mean when it comes to speech, right? Like this accent I'm doing is my generic American, and it's just me moving my muscles at a different rate and frequency than if I was to talk to you in my sort of normal Australian accent. And I don't think I'm any less authentic when I talk to you like this than when I talk to you like this. I still feel like it's me. And so when we get to the core of the muscles that move for authenticity, and we look at that, I think it then opens up people who might be resisting connecting to their heart to go, huh. Because at the core principle, all you need to speak is your muscles moving with some airflow between them. I mean, that's kind of it.
So why did you choose for this dialogue to be in American and not in Australian?
Yeah, because I would love to connect and partner with more listeners because I think the work I do is really, really special. And I learn a lot through my clients. I think it's really special. And often I've noticed that when I am in the meeting of the minds with people who are really wanting to work with me, the accent doesn't matter. And that happens a lot. But I've also had some diamonds in the rough of clients and partners who do seek me out, but then they're having their own resistance that I'm female, that I'm young, that I'm a foreigner. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, you sought me out. Like, it's like, oh, and not that I'm their therapist, but there's a healing that's going on when that happens between client and coach. And that's a gift that I actually really enjoy, which is why I say if I have my oxygen mask on, I don't see why we have to resist. I want to work with people who want to work with me. And sometimes that might mean some things heal along the way. And sometimes for these individuals, it's easier to hear me in this voice because I proved myself. I can do it. I can do the American accent that they're wanting to do. Or I am able to turn on a more kind of corporate solar side in a way that they might meet alongside me having a flower and jewelry and being very artsy in my demeanor today. So that's why I do that.
Yeah. So there's something that you brought to me, another gift, which is really interesting, and thank you, um, which is solar lunar
Mm.
is source.
Yeah.
Okay. It is God, it is nature, it is Tankashila, whatever. Solar lunar.
Yeah.
Solar lunar in complementarity is field and particle. So for you, and when you say authenticity has solar and lunar, yes, and performance has solar and lunar, yes, right?
Yeah.
But what happens in the moment, and this is when it gets into the quantum reality, because of your level of integration and practice, you have a choice.
Mm.
So you can choose to present as American, or you can choose to present as Australian, which means that the solar lunar is the same as the ego self. It's the same as the heart mind. And when you have that connection, you can choose to present from the heart or present from the mind. And you don't hide your heart. So that authenticity is the heart mind, the ego self, the performance, authenticity. It's the whole thing, the whole package.
Brilliant. I took notes on that. I'm gonna work and meditate in that. That's powerful. It's really helpful. Thank you.
Well, cool. Well, one thing I also do with these sessions, you can see I'm recording it. So what we're going to do is also I ship it off to Otter, so we
Mhm.
have the transcript,
Mhm.
and the people who are watching this who decide to subscribe to the whole, be part of the full package, they're actually going to get speaker notes and extra stuff from you.
Yeah.
So, if they want to pursue that path, that authentic performance path,
Yeah.
There'll be all kinds of interesting goodies, um, that'll lead. Because that's the other thing that I think about in terms of these three stages.
Yeah.
Um, the we are having a shared experience here that actually the other people watching this are not sharing, because there is a reality to time and space and source. Einstein said, yes, time and space don't exist, but he's saying it in the way of they don't exist the way we think about it. But we also know that everything exists, just like it, okay, or at least I do, because I
I do.
read Spinoza and I was a philosophy major. So this is my understanding of what is real and what is not real. Okay. So the important part of this is that there are things that are synchronic and are things that are diachronic. There are
Yeah.
things that unfold in time and things that are separated in space and things that happen at the same time in time and space. Okay. So the app, the invitation is also to participate on the app. There are two types of members. There are members and there are creators. And the invitation of this summit was to discover as many, to show, to demonstrate, to model people who show up as members,
Yeah.
the behavior of creators and how to manifest this. So part of the invitation is during this 3 days of live that we're going to have, the 29th to the 1st, I'd also like to list some times when you might be able to show up on the app
Sure.
and maybe just do some of this ad hoc coaching for people. If you're willing to do that, I think it would be amazing
I'd love that.
to allow people to talk and allow you to reflect back to them what you're seeing and give them some guidance and maybe say, okay, try this for 7 days or join my 7-day program and get through this. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I'm in 1,010%. Sounds wonderful.
Yay. Well, man, I mean, this is just, I feel like we've, done a year-long course in probably less than an hour. But there's sort of a completeness just to, I mean, my heart is full. um,
Yeah.
but I would like to hear if there is anything else that it's not over till it's over. So if there is something else that you'd like to share with our audience and me.
I want to say thank you for the audience listening and also your time. You've given me a lot of gifts today, so this is quite delicious. I really mean that. Thank you. Is there anything else I want to share? I guess, yeah, there is. We were talking before about the hiding of self from self and the almost going to rock bottom in order to heal from that space. And I think, as you said, time unfolds in its natural pace, and there is a time and space that does function. And I brought up the concept of, do we all have to go to crash bottom in order to really find ourselves again? And I would propose we don't. Having said that, I did. So what do I know? But I think through that, whilst there are certain things that definitely were going to unfold in my time-space reality that had to happen almost in that time-space reality in sort of more physical, three-dimensional sense. Had I had the concept and awareness of being gentle with myself through taking action that feels good, had I had just those two phrases, be gentle with yourself
Mm.
and take action that ideally should feel good. Sometimes getting angry at yourself can feel good. Having a good cry really does sometimes feel good. I think I would have maybe not had to have crashed, but still had the experience. I don't know. I'm not saying I want to change it, but what I am saying is I think that's something I do want to share with the audience. This concept of where can I feel more good about the actions I'm taking and when I'm taking the actions, and how can I be more gentle with myself in doing so. Also, just a technical element, David. Unfortunately, my computer is a little low on juice. I'm just going to very delicately pause the camera as I juice it up, if I may.
Okay, please.
Okay. Okay. 2 seconds.
Well, fortunately, we're going to be editing this anyway. So
Wonderful.
So no one will even know. um, so I'm really glad I asked, because that actually brought in three important topics that I want to explore. And we budgeted a full hour for the presentation for people watching, so we can bring some of these things in. So one is that so the compassion
Mm,
for yourself, the being gentle, the empathy. Um, Empathy is at the center of Howard's work
yeah.
and the mirror neurons, and it's the one thing that I found that, going back to some of the beginning of this with some of my mentors who had poverty or scarcity
Mhm.
dramas, it was very much because of that um, empathy for so many other people, but lack of compassion for
Yeah.
themselves. Um, and one of my mentors, this is a book I'm going to recommend. Actually, the first program I ever took, like the first time I actually went and did something. Actually, not really true. I had done some shamanism courses from Michael Harner back in the 80s, and I was in Narcotics Anonymous, which is certainly a program. Uh, but um, my wife and I, for our 10th anniversary, we said, hey, let's go someplace where we'll never hope our kids are there, or wish our kids were there. So, and we each picked one thing. So I said, I really want to go to Esalen Institute and take, this deep program. And I didn't know it was there. I just said, this is the week we're taking off. We decided to do 2 weeks, which was crazy. We had 3 young children, but we handed them off to my parents. This is 2004. We went to Esalen, and the thing that was happening there was Bill Plotkin's Soulcraft. So we
Mhm.
took Soulcraft. And my wife, Monica, who I love so dearly, she's very much comes from, her parents are older, and she says this, well, I come from Viking stock. If you're not bleeding, there's no problem. Right. You just, you know, and we went into this session of Soulcraft,
Mm,
with nature-based communications and all these things.
yeah.
But Bill said, in the beginning, we gave ourselves names. And Bill said his name was Web Weaver because his gift is weaving cocoons of transformation where people, oh man, I can't believe I just forgot it. Weave cocoons of transformation where people can initiate themselves into the mysteries of their own soul.
Mhm.
And that was so profound on so many levels in terms of initiation and self-initiation. And he showed us how to do self-directed ceremonies
Mhm.
so that when you're talking to nature, and um, I was very interested. Like I said, I took shamanism course with Michael Harner.
Mm,
I read Sitting Bull, I read
mm,
Black Elk, and I used to try and do things on my own. Like I would just go into the woods and throw away my glasses, a glass at a time. I would get completely naked. I would throw away my wallet, my ID, and I would literally walk into the woods
right.
as far as I could and say, I believe I can communicate with nature. If Black Elk can do it, if Sitting Bull can do it, if Jesus can do it, there's no reason that me as a physical human being, if source is there, if nature is there, if life is there, why won't it talk to me? Damn it, I'm not leaving until you talk to me. Well, what I learned is
Mm,
that the ceremony is actually important,
mm,
that there actually are structures,
mm,
that there are ways, and that indigenous tribes, indigenous civilizations, indigenous cultures, indigenous societies were all based around how to do it, how to make that ego self access, that heart, mind, gut access,
yeah.
so that nature, life, God, Tenkashala, and Shimaka is trying to talk to you all the time.
Right.
And so it took that throwing myself against it over and over and over until finally I went and paid my, I don't know, $1,000 to Esalen Institute. And Bill said, here's how you do self-directed ceremonies. And we went out and did these ceremonies, and nature started talking to me. All of this amazing stuff happened. So what I see is what you're talking about is the compassion and the safe space is essentially a cocoon that you create with your clients so that it's safe. You're saying to the audience here, be compassionate, be gentle, be in safety. And it's a literal thing
Yeah.
that I found is that you actually can't, if you're in fear,
Yeah.
your whole vehicle is going to be different.
Yeah.
You're not going to be authentic because you're in the mode of fight, flight, faint, flee. You know, and I took guided meditation courses with somebody who actually went through that same physiology of and explained that hypnotherapy is performative.
Yeah.
It's and I didn't understand that. So, I always thought it was kind of like they were in a trance too, but it's not, And so there's these cool things. So kind of the final where I was getting with this, and I wrote these 3 things down. So cocoons of transformation, compassion for yourself, but the third part,
Yeah.
bringing Howard back in,
Yeah.
is the core thing that he taught me is speed to reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that when it's how quickly you're always going to get that wound
Yeah.
all the time. So the big wounds are, okay, I've hit bottom. Well, saying you've hit bottom doesn't mean you've hit bottom. There's still almost always a deeper bottom. Um, but then they can start getting shallower and shallower and shallower, where you just recognize as quickly as possible
Yeah.
that you've bumped up against nature, source, life, whatever is trying to speak to you, but you're here in this um, fear mode, right? You're thinking, okay, something's attacking me, something's threatening me because of those memories, like you said, of childhood. And so you're in that hiding. And so the speed at which you get to, when you said, changing the world, right? It's all of these people, if everyone realized that it's not a big change. It's just how quickly can we go from wave to particle,
Yeah.
from, solar to lunar or lunar to solar, whatever that choice is in that moment. How quickly can I make a new choice? I've just noticed that this person is reacting this way. Okay, now that I've noticed it,
Yeah.
am I going to make the choice of being Australian or being American? Am I going to make the choice of being empathetic or the choice of being challenging? Am I going to make the choice? And then what you brought to me is how fast you can make that choice to yourself.
Yeah.
How fast can I say, wow, I'm not being gentle on myself,
Yeah.
right? And that's something I never thought about with myself. I've only thought about that with other people.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's a long way of just sort of working my way. And there's one other really interesting thing I just want to say. So, and I've never said this publicly, like ever in all of these. One of my mentors is Four Arrows. You're going to be meeting him if you haven't already in this. Um, he's going to be part of the Shared Experience Summit. But he made the choice at a certain point of using his Lakota name.
Yeah.
Um, and I've never spoken my Lakota name publicly, but it's Chante Wambly, which means eagle heart. And it was given to me in a naming ceremony. And for me, that is the connection of that sight and the law, having the far seeing of the eagle, which flies the highest, but feeling it and processing it all in my heart. And I wanted to share that with you because this is, over the course of this hour, I really like I said, I felt that it was complete, and I appreciate you having the wisdom that there was still more here for me and more here for our audience. And now I mean, my heart is filled with gratitude for you and the gifts you've brought to me and all the people who are watching this today, and I hope who will experience you directly during this summit.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing that. Super grateful to you. Thank you.